and then kick us off. Okay, we're good to go.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad to see some of my fellow data Uber UDP nerds have attended to this session. I think this is definitely an interesting topic, and just kind of some background about how we got here today. So at my institution, the University of Florida, I had some faculty that were interested in doing some work with this thing they heard about called UDP from our CIO. And so I reached out to them and kind of heard their use cases and said, definitely we have that data in the UDP, and definitely we can, get you an account, get you set up on there. And, in the back of my mind, I thought about, well, these people really just need to see the data that's for the classes they're teaching. So I thought about how we do that locally. Usually row level security is implemented at the application layer, but with a database access, which is effectively what the UDP is, that's not something that we could control on our own at the institution. So I reached out to Kyle and Sarah and said, hey guys, here's the kind of the thing I want to work on. And we kind of noodled about it, and they thought about it, and they said, yeah, sure, that's possible. And so we did a little proof of concept, and I don't think it took us very long to come up with it and kind of refine the process. And then we thought it'd be a really great thing to share with the rest of the consortium and show you how easy it is that you can kind of do this yourself in 5 or 6 easy steps, or work with your data steward, I guess I should say more appropriately, to do this. And so Kyle's going to run through a little bit of a live demo here and jump in with questions. I did make a kind of a low-tech cookie cutter cookbook slide deck that you can get later if you want to review any of the steps, or if there's something that you might have missed or something. But as always, Kyle and Sarah are always available, and James are always available to provide the knowledge. So I'll let Kyle run with it. Looks like we got a good crowd here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for setting the stage. So there are a lot of familiar faces here, but for anyone who hasn't met before, I'm Kyle Unruh. I'm the data solutions architect at Unizin. I've been at Unizin about 2 years now, and I joined Unizin on February 17th, 2020. And I had a total of 4 weeks in the office before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. So it's been an interesting ride for sure. But kind of through that, it's almost in some ways facilitated getting to know some of these stakeholders for the Unizin data platform even a little bit better, a little bit faster, because we were kind of forced into these virtual settings. And so we've really found a groove. And this has been one of the topics that has come up more and more, especially as UDP adoption has ticked up and as use cases have evolved kind of mid and post pandemic. There are different stakeholders that are getting involved, as Andrew was saying, and faculty members are starting to realize and see dashboards based on the UDP, and they want to know how to get their hands on this data, but we want to do it right? We don't want to wrongfully expose certain pieces of data into the wrong hands. One of the biggest benefits of the UDP is its accessibility and its depth of student modeling and learner modeling. But at the same time, what comes with that is appropriate permissions, privacy, and policy to make sure that students are kept safe. And so before we dive into the demo, I just kind of want to give kind of the asterisk here. This is one way that we've explored doing it. There's a wide variety of tools that I think that we need to have in our tool belt when it comes to looking at row level access and user defined access to certain data assets. And there's perhaps one end of this, it's a spectrum, right? So there might be one end of the spectrum that is a fully managed third-party tool like Denodo, or in some cases even like Alteryx can do it, or reporting platforms like Tableau. You can manage different security groups of users, and you can feed that through in a fully managed application at the reporting layer. That's one way you could do it. And so the kind of the lift there isn't so much on the UDP side, it's more so downstream at the application side, which works, but also assumes resources and assumes money and assumes contracts and assumes you have those people available to manage those security groups. So it's not without its own cost and its own investment, right? And then on the other end is kind of very case-by-case data delivery, which has its benefit of defining the exact fields, the exact tables, and the exact set of users and names that get to see data. You can separate that data, you can deliver that data in its own environment. There's no risk of leakage, there's no risk of anything getting out, but the difficulty of that is it doesn't really scale, right? What happens when one of those users change? What happens if one of those users, there's a new user, someone leaves, someone joins? You have to have hands on deck to kind of manage those data assets. And we've noticed that type of access works really well for kind of a grant funded research where the fields are defined and don't change a lot. The data is pretty static and heavily historical, and the researchers are a small set. So in a very confined, narrow sense, that works, but it doesn't quite scale. So that's kind of like another extreme. And this is kind of an approach that we've been exploring to leverage our Google Cloud tools and see how close to the UDP can we kind of derive some fields and insert some policies at perhaps a data mart level to say at query execution, these are the rows that come back. So this is kind of a more, I'm not sure if dynamic is the right word, but it's kind of a link between cloud user and associating rows with the appropriate users within the UDP. So it's kind of bridging all of that together. So I'll start sharing my screen and we'll walk through kind of what we got for today. So I'm sharing now. You should be able to see a UF authentication login screen. Does everybody see that? Okay.
Yes.
Yep, thumbs up. Perfect. Okay. So this is a shell course that Andrew spun up and enrolled me as an instructor. I'm not sure real students would actually want me as an instructor, but this is what we have for now. So I'm going to log in. In preparation for this, I've gotten a UFL login aside, but let me try this one more time.
Yeah, that's just your cookies, or yeah.
Should I just refresh?
Yeah, you're just kind of.
Retry login. Let me try one more time. I've been on this page a while. So.
Yeah, it'll time out.
Okay, sweet. All right.
Oh, now I think you're not. Now I think when you hit the login, it just went to the. Yeah, it just went to login. You just need to go back to the Canvas URL real quick.
Okay, let me just get the URL real quick. It wouldn't be a demo for Summit without one hitch, right? Okay. Let me just copy this and just put it. See if we get in there. Log into e-learning. Sweet. Okay, we're in. So this is a Star Trek space exploration course. And this is a Canvas shell that is published and live within UFL's prod Canvas environment. And what that means is that this course, even though it's meaningless in terms of actual instruction, is being fed through the batch ingest process and into the event store in the UDP into their prod UDP environment. This is a real course that exists, which means that we can use the prod environment in GCP to do some analysis on this. So what I want to show is, we have two use cases we're going to show today. One is kind of an enrollment use case, and the other is going to be kind of a discussion use case with a few nuances on how we would introduce this row level security at the kind of BigQuery level, or at the as close to the data as we can, perhaps. So we have this roster. So I'm enrolled as a teacher. We also have kind of this test account that Andrew likes to use, Alberta Alligator, as teachers, and the rest are students. And we have a handful of discussions, right? So the only reason why I'm showing this is you're going to see this data again represented kind of on the UDP side. So this is just kind of showing that what's in Canvas is making its way all the way through to the UDP. And we see, like I have this test discussion here for level security. It doesn't have any replies, but this is one that I made and it's published to all sections. This should look pretty familiar for anyone who's used a Canvas shell before. There's really nothing special going on. There's no special setup you need to do on the Canvas side to get this working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition to BigQuery now, and there's 3 queries that we've pulled together. They're shown here, and I'm not going to spend the entire time, I promise, writing SQL. But what I just wanted to show is these are leveraging the relationships that we get from the Unizin data platform. So data has been pulled in from both the SIS and from Canvas, transformed according to the Unizin common data model, and then stored in Google Cloud, right? So all we're doing here is we have a pass-through data set, which is helpful for the demo today, but we're joining enrollments with person emails, with person identifiers, with the course section that it's associated with, which is associated with a course offering. A course offering can have one or many course sections, and then each course offering is part of an academic term, right? With some filtering going on and some grouping. And what we're doing here, some of these fields are commented out just because they're very sensitive fields, but we could do something in like an enrollment use case if we want a view of the data or a mart of the data that is just for instructors to show the students that are enrolled in their course, right? We could do something like we have the academic term, the course title, the course offering, the course sections that are rolled up for this one-to-many relationship between course section and course offering. We have the IDs, which we're still showing. You could do something like first names and last names. You could then show like student email addresses if you wanted to. You can then show the same like for teachers that are enrolled or teaching assistants that are enrolled. You could then, we're showing their IDs. You could do their first names and last names. And then we are showing, and this is important, we're showing an aggregation as an array of all the teachers and teaching assistants for this course. Like, so for all the course sections of this course, we'll have emails for the teachers that are there, and we're calling it enrolled teacher emails. And what you get is kind of this selection here. It's not necessarily that exciting, right? But we do have some of these don't have any enrolled students. They're empty shells, which is fine. But we can go down and we can see like enrolled teacher IDs and then corresponding emails of these teachers. This enrolled teacher email field is very critical for our enforcement of row level security. At this stage, though, there's no row level security enforced, and we have all these tables saved under this data set in BigQuery called UFL Summit with enrollments, no policy. You'll see for both discussions, which is the next use case I'll go through, and the enrollments use case, there's 2 tables, just one without a policy, row level policy, and one with a policy, but these are the same tables. So like if I go to details, 130,000 rows for no policy, and then I literally just copied this table. So these are really the same. And what we're going to show is one of these tables we're going to enforce the policy, and one of them we're not, and we're going to show kind of the distinction there. For the discussions, this is a little bit more straightforward query. What we want to do is we want to look at, for every discussion ID, we want to kind of characterize some of the message responses. This could expand into really anything that you want to do. You could do NLP metrics, you could do ease of reading score, sentiment analysis on these, but just for demonstration purposes, all we're doing is for each discussion, we're counting the number of replies and how long each reply is for each discussion ID. And then we're linking that back with the course offering that is associated with that discussion. And then we're also able to pull in, using this join, the email address of the author. And so what you can see here is we have course offerings, titles of discussions, and then you can see emails of people that have authored that email. And similar to the enrollment use case, appending this author email field is critical for us whenever we do our row level policy. So again, for discussions with no policy, we're looking at 2.9 million discussions, and discussions with policy, we're looking at 2.9 million discussion. So these are the same data set. So to kind of go through the workflow, you could have your analyst or team work with UDP data, define the logic at a total UDP level for each of these marks. So you can have an enrollment mark that's defined without these row level policy considerations, and you can also have this discussion mark without row policy considerations. It's now at this place where we're going to leverage some of the row policy logic that you can have within Google Cloud, specifically on BigQuery, to have a destination table with a row policy attached to it. So what we're doing here is we have this logic, and we're actually able to put 2 row policies. So you can perhaps have this just as one script that you maintain, right? But different row policies on different sets of tables. So the syntax is to create or replace a row access policy. You name it something. You just have to have a unique name here. You have a destination table. So for our purposes, it's UDP UFL prod, which is the GCP project, the BigQuery dataset called UFL Summit, and then the name of the table on which you want the policy to go. So this is the fully resolved name of this table where we're going to have the policy. You can then have different cohorts that you can grant access to across the board. So this is kind of your first level of filtering. And what we have here is we have grant to anyone that has a domain of ufl.edu. And just because I'm Unizin, domain of unizin.org, right? Ideally, you wouldn't have this, right? If you don't want Unizin in there, you would just have domain at youruniversity.edu. And that means that anyone who's querying this table, the first level of checking that they do is going to be whether or not they have a ufl.edu account. So that's kind of your first level of defense here, is this line. And then you can then filter the results, and this filter using is what you get for the row. And this is why the emails are so important to have as a descriptive column on your tables, because the way that we've used it for this example is there's this kind of parameter or function you could call session user. And what this does is it pulls back in Google Cloud. In fact, let me just show you that. So I just select session user. Very simple query, but it pulls back my email, right? So kind of the link here to get from cloud user to rows in the UDP that are owned by individuals is this kind of email, or that's a strong link. So the person email entity in the UDP is very key here. So the logic here is that the session user, it runs this, is in the unnested array. So we have this array of, see, it's a repeated string of emails. So if we have if the session user is listed in the enrolled teacher emails, then show them that row. If they're not, then they don't get to see that row. And so we can, if I just highlight this and run this, what we get is this statement created a new row access policy named teacher email filter, right? And so if we can see this kind of working, let's do like a select account of distinct course offering ID from UFL Summit enrollments no policy, right? So this is going to just say for this table that doesn't have the policy, how many courses can we see? Can I see as a user? So I can see 130,091, right? Because that's the total number of rows. If I now say enrollments with policy, so this is now pointing to that new table that has the policy. And now you'll notice that BigQuery, as sophisticated as a tool as it is, it doesn't know how big it's going to actually scan because it's using that session user parameter and it's unnesting per row, right? So this actually might take a little longer to return. So, oh, I actually get 2 rows. I was expecting 1 row, but I'm guessing, Andrew, there might be, when we tested this in the fall, I might still be enrolled in that course. So let me just do this. So it's not 130,000, it's now down to 2. And so if I do, let me just do select star. I want to see what this other course is. So you'll see that BigQuery gives you this at the top before you run it, and then it says your results may be limited because you don't have access to certain rows. Oh, okay, yeah. So this is a kind of a demo course that we had set up that I'm also enrolled in. kind of test this. But you do see kind of at the top, you have this spring 2022 course, this NCC 1701 Advanced Tactical Training, which is the name of like this course. So it traveled from Canvas into the UDP. And I can see the enrolled student IDs. I can see the enrolled teacher IDs, of which I'm one of them. And then you can see the enrolled teachers' emails, which was the critical field to get this going, right? So that's the enrollment use case. The idea here is that if you have this enrolled, if you have this table enrollments with policy connected to something like a Data Studio dashboard, a Tableau dashboard, when you refresh that view, assuming it's a live connection, the user that logs into that system could be linked up with this logic here for enrolled teacher emails or something, and they would only get their rows back at the reporting layer. So our next use case is it's honestly really similar. But we do the grant to and the filter using a little differently. So we still have this create or replace row access policy. You could just do create if you're going to just do it once. But if you want to ever change the row level policy, which I did a lot testing this, trying to get ready for Summit, create or replace is useful. You have to give it a unique name. Then you give a fully resolved table destination. So similar, this is discussions with policy versus discussions no policy. And you can grant to, this time I'm doing all authenticated users. And this is a little different than grant to the domains. So the idea here is all authenticated users would be anyone who is logged into the system at the time. So this is very prescriptive of the domains. This is anyone who's logged in. In an ideal sense, these would overlap, right? But it's not guaranteed. This is a little bit looser. But what I'm doing here for the filter using, I'm still using session user. And in this case, I'm doing it not on an array of values that I'm unnesting, but this is specific just to an individual email, right? So what this will give, instead of this one that any teacher can see this, only the author of each discussion will be able to see their discussion metrics. This even means that an instructor may not be able to see a row in here if they are not the author of a discussion. So if a student authors a discussion, the instructor won't even be able to see it. So in this regard, this grant to is a little looser, but this filter using is a little bit even more restrictive. So this is, I would say, the lowest level of row level policy that we could do using this approach. And so if I run this again, this is going to put the author email filter on the discussions with policy table. And if I do like a similar query and I do like a count discussion ID on, we call this discussions, no policy. Let's see. Oh, let me just do title then. I didn't bring through the ID. That's fine. So this number may not actually match the exact number of rows in the table. That's okay. So we get 926,000 distinct titles that I could see without this row level policy. But then if I change this to with policy and run this, this goes down to 1. I have one authored discussion based off of the same base data in rows. These are just copied tables. I'm now only able to see 1. So if I then just do this just to verify, we get this test discussion row level security with me message length. It's 22 bytes, I guess. And that matches this discussion for test discussion row level security, right? So with that, I guess I'll take a pause, and I guess I'll just summarize. So like the process that I would see if this works for some of the use case that Andrew described would be, your analysts are still empowered to write and define marks at an exhaustive level, right? You're not necessarily having to define individual data sets and copy those data sets somewhere else. You can still keep the data at an aggregated level or at a very wide level. But then if you're able to leverage, and if the situation makes sense, for the email field to match a session user field in Google Cloud or some other tool that's able to dynamically pull an email of a user, this is something that could scale nicely, while still enabling your analysts to do things at a larger scalable level. So I guess with that, Andrew, is there anything else that you want to add, or should we just open it up for questions?
I'm happy to open the questions now. And they don't have to be technical questions. They can be questions about, hey, have you thought about using it for this or something else? Or
yeah, nice demo, Kyle.
Awesome. Thank you, Jyotsna. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Actually, we were also like trying to implement this in the UNL analytics that we've been working on, and this is just so timely. But except that we've been using the Postgres context store tables, but I'm using the Tableau user functions, but it's sort of like joining on the instructors and then checking if the user is an instructor. But so my question is like, if we are doing some kind of like an embedded dashboard, like how would the scenario work out? Because through Tableau, I don't think we'll be authorizing like the instructor every time. So like I think it again goes back to like the use case, like what kind of use cases are we looking at here?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think, and I'm admittedly not a Tableau expert, so if Tableau does their user management, like if they don't pass through something that would be resolved as the session user, then you might still have to rely on Tableau to do that user management. I think where this hits a sweet spot is if you're using something like Data Studio, perhaps, instead, right? That has a direct link into BigQuery. Like those users you could then resolve as those session users. I also do want to point out that there are other metrics that you can use that are supported by BigQuery other than session user. So that may not be the right metric to link with Tableau. I just don't know enough about Tableau to say what that actual path would be.
No, actually that helps. Yeah, that really helps. So yeah, in Tableau, since this is like our tool is going to be like across the institution, and we are not going to know what kind who's going to access it, like especially the instructors. So creating groups was not feasible at this point, because otherwise I'll have to like create instructor groups for like a lot of courses, and courses are going to keep adding as the semester grows. So
yeah.
So this but yeah, using that kind of explains, like if you're using Data Studio, then definitely that would help.
Yeah, I would say though, I wouldn't throw Tableau away though for this method. I think the linchpin there is whether or not the session user parameter resolves, right? And so where I would focus if you want to explore this method is, keep most of it the same, but if there's some script or some utility that has to be built into that row policy to make Tableau and GCP communicate who's actually logging in to the Tableau workbook. And I know Tableau, you can either do extracts or you can do a live connection. Maybe you explore like the live connection and somehow pass back to GCP the user information of that Tableau user, right? Maybe there's a way to do that. And so the session user parameter that's just baked in for GCP might change to whatever the resolved Tableau user is, but that may be where the process would work. It would need a little bit of
we probably have to dig
massaging.
into that. Yeah, because I think our Tableau user is an NUID, but I'm not sure like what the session users like set up as like for our Google account. So yeah, that would be good to dig in. Also, we have not like really used the event store data for the dashboard. So like for university-wide dashboards. Yeah. So another question I had is it okay to like use the context store data out of Google BigQuery? Because my concern is when we are going university wide and like in case people start like clicking on these dashboards, at the same time, since it's cost associated, I was wondering if it's still okay to use the context store based off of the Google BigQuery instead of the Postgres.
Yeah. So for now, the short answer is yes with an asterisk, right? So you're right. It is cost driven based on query usage. But one of the things that we're really focusing on are partitioning the tables to make sure that the query scan is as small as possible. And also just the overall size of context store data is a lot smaller than event store data. So your context store is probably 60 gigabytes maybe, and the event store is like 4 terabytes. So in terms of cost and query usage, you could probably query the entirety of the context store multiple times an hour per day and not even touch the potential cost of a single event store query if it goes off the rails. So I wouldn't, we'll let you know if the costs go out of hand. But for now, I want you to feel empowered to consume the data through the tool that makes the most sense. And then that's important information for us as we refine our product offering, right? If we are seeing users are gravitating more towards BigQuery for context store and event data, then that is something that we can start baking into our policies and make that as optimized as possible. So
awesome. Yeah, I'll keep you posted as we keep trying that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Allison, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Allison.
Hey there. I'll put it down in a sec. So I was just curious, this is really cool to see and like very concrete, which is really helpful. The one thing I noticed was that you were using the user session ID. And I was curious if you've noticed any quirks with like the Google versus non-Google schools in that space, if it depends on your email.
Yeah, so I haven't, and I think, well, at least from my understanding is some of those quirks get handled upstream. So it's almost a non-issue when it gets to this point. Like when you get added as a user in GCP, you already have to be associated with G Suite. So some of the headache happens, thankfully, outside
in that
of
first
my
association.
realm. Yeah. So for them to even be at the BigQuery stage to run that query or something similar, right? They would already have that ironed out. But Andrew, I don't know if you have.
I'll add to that. I'm a more of a favorite, rather than using email address, to use federated identity, which is a field on the person table, because I know that that's our SSO, and my SSO is the same as my email, so I would have to go test it. Find somebody whose SSO is not their email. It'd be a really easy test to do to see if how that feels, and that's something I've thought about, but just low on the list of priorities.
And also maybe a little in that vein of like management, I was curious if you've looked at any tools or seen any like promising overlap with things like Grouper or Active Directory, or like kind of ways of managing groups that are a little more. So one of the things I'm thinking about is, sometimes associate deans want to see data for all the courses in their college that they may not be officially associated with, but we might manage that via a tool like a Grouper and then pull into here. That might be too big of a question right now, but
it is interesting. I mean, right now with the cloud structure that we have for the data, we don't really have a space to, well, it's now striking me, we might want to explore it, but a space to model these user groups. And it could be kind of generalizing this process if there is a way to uniformly export stuff from Grouper into BigQuery, then this process might work for that as well. We would just pull that information and enforce the row policy. Instead of on email, it would be some grouper.person table or something like that, right? It's not something we've explored though. Good questions. Any other questions?
maybe more of a tack on for Andrew then, just does it feel like this is something that you would be able to use with researchers or folks for specific provisioning? Like what would be a flow? Is this feeling like something that?
Yeah, we've already done this at least twice. So I had a instructor or a faculty member who's doing research, and he wanted to be able to connect to R and do some discussion sentiment analysis. Another one wanted to look at LTI tool launches. And so, I was able to, for the LTI tool launch, I was actually able to take one of the data marts that Kyle built for the dashboard and kind of apply this to that. So, the heavy lifting had already been done. For the discussion one, it was just a little bit of, taking and basically what Kyle kind of did here today was taking discussion entries and joining that with discussion topics and joining that to the course offering. So it's, I'm slowly building up my library of reusable kind of data marts that I can answer some of these most common questions. And then just, kind of the biggest part, and Kyle and I were talking about this before, is, we feel like we have a handle on the UDP now as data stewards. And now comes the part of getting out there and evangelizing and getting people onboarded and showing them, hey, here's what other people have done. So, we're talking about coming up with a, little one pager that says, here's some use cases that have been done, just to kind of spark people's ideas of what they can do with it, because the UDP is going to be our primary place that we're going to send our faculty who want to do this kind of research.
All right. Any last questions before we wrap up?
This is more maybe a bigger like kind of Google side question, but how mature do you think their suite of these privacy tools are? Like if you've looked at it, I just don't have a sense of how their product line evolves.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have to admit, even though I did the demo today, I don't necessarily feel super qualified to answer the breadth of it. I think it's there. It feels very niche in some instances, right? So like this, and that's kind of why I intentionally, before I showed anything, this is definitely not a one size fits all approach to doing it. It works great for BigQuery, and that's kind of where I've been focusing my time on learning how this works, is the BigQuery side. There's probably other consideration. I mean, the way you would do it perhaps for Cloud SQL is more a line, not even a GCP designed access, but perhaps more just Postgres, like at a general Postgres level, right? You would define some of that perhaps. It feels very tool specific. It feels, but again, if someone is more of a Google expert than I am, I'm all ears to have my mind changed. It's just organically going, setting this up and working through this use case with Andrew. That's kind of the road I've been down. It's very, kind of tool specific.
So I threw in the chat just a very, very lean slide deck with some of the steps that Kyle went through, and they're not exactly the same steps he used, but kind of in case you missed it. But I'm sure if there's any questions, Kyle's always available, as I've found.
Yeah.
And Sarah too. So Sarah
Yeah.
helped us on this as well. So
yeah, Sarah's not in this one, but she did a lot of lifting for this as well. Awesome. Well, with that, we'll end just a few minutes early, I think. Thanks everyone for joining us. It was great to see you all, and we'll distribute the recording. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you all.
Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Bye.